Hello and welcome to the Brooklyn Rail's 741st New Social Environment. I'm Carolyn, a Programs Associate here at the Rail, and I have the extreme pleasure and privilege of being your MC today for a conversation featuring Hilton Als, Maren Hassinger, Elaine Reichek, Liz Larner, and Jonathan T.D. Neal. We're thrilled to welcome poet Betsy Fagin here to close today's program. Before we get started, the Brooklyn Rail acknowledges Black Lives Matter. Here in New York, we are on Lenape-Hoking, the unceded land and waters of the Wappinger, Canarsie, Munsee, and Lenni Lenape people of the Delaware Nation and Shinnecock Indian Nation. We recognize land acknowledgements are not a replacement for necessary decolonial work, but serve as a reminder of place, of the legacies of dispossession and enslavement that sustain and enrich the stolen land we are speaking from. And now to introduce today's guest and hosts. Hilton Als is an associate professor of writing at the Columbia University School of the Arts and a staff writer for The New Yorker. He has taught at several renowned institutions, and prior to writing for The New Yorker, Als was a staff writer for The Village Voice and an editor-at-large at Vibe. He has won numerous awards for his work, including the 2017 Pulitzer Prize for Criticism, among others. Marin Hassinger has built an expansive practice that articulates humanity's inextricable connection with nature. Through an intentional choice of material, Hassinger explores subjects such as movement, environment, identity, and race. The artist has executed commissions for multiple notable institutions and is the recipient of the Women's Caucus for the Arts Lifetime Achievement Award. Elaine Reichek lives and works in New York. She has exhibited extensively in the US and abroad. Thread has been a core element in Reichek's work since the early 1970s, and she was a pioneer among her generation in rethinking the role of craft in the fine arts. Sacramento-born artist Liz Larner experiments with abstract sculptural forms in an array of materials, including polychromatic ceramics that evoke the tectonic geologic shifts of the Western landscape. Her work has been included in group and solo exhibitions internationally and is in numerous public and private collections. Larner has also received a Guggenheim Fellowship, among other awards. And our host today, Jonathan T.D. Neal, was editor of the Held Essays on Visual Art for the Brooklyn Rail from 2011 to 2015. He's co-founder of Inversion Art and an editor-at-large for the Brooklyn Rail. Thank you all so much for being here today, and I'll turn it over to you, Jonathan.
Thank you so much, Carolyn and Chloe and everybody at the Brooklyn Rail. We really appreciate all the work that you've done to pull this together. And of course, thank you to Elaine and Maren and Liz, and of course, Hilton for joining us on this for this conversation today. It's not always that you have a conversation between four remarkable artists in their own right, working in multiple different mediums, but to have a conversation about a fifth, somewhat incredible artist as well, makes things somewhat difficult from the standpoint of a moderator. So please bear with us, or bear with me. To set the stage, I think it's important because many people who are joining on the call very likely have not had a chance to see this exhibition or to see the work that has been included in the exhibition. And since we have these artists with us on the Zoom today, I think it would be great just to begin to introduce those works that have been included. So I'm going to ask the artists to talk about the pieces that have been included in the show, and I know that we have visuals of those that we could put up on the screen as well. So perhaps Maren, could we begin with you and talk about the work River, which is one of those major pieces in the show that confronts viewers when they enter into the first main room. You can talk about that piece, and then I'll have each of the artists sort of introduce their work, and then Hilton, I would love to, at the end of that introduction, to have you talk a little bit about your rationale for their inclusion and your thoughts about these individual pieces themselves as well, and then we'll get more into the Q&A for all of you. So Maren.
Okay, so this is River, and it is very heavy. And I don't remember all the circumstances around collecting the materials for it, but I do remember that it was backbreaking and I don't want to deal with it. I'm sure the people who organized the show and the curatorial staff who had to lay the piece out were cursing me the whole time.
No.
Well, it weighs something like 50 pounds, a foot or something like that.
Yes.
It can't be, it almost can't be any other way than the way it is. And so I can't really honestly tell you how it became a river, except that maybe it became a river because I just couldn't deal with it anymore. I just couldn't, there was nothing I could do. It told me I need to lay on the floor and I need to be pulled this way and that way. And, it could have ended up being, I don't know, something that would make you think of criminals or something like that, because it is chain or slavery or something like that. But the fact that it resolved itself into a river and is so much more meaningful than the fact that it's rope and chain. Rope and chain have all this like really negative, particularly negative if you're African American. But it's a river, and it's ongoing and it's flowing and it's powerful and it's strong and it's not stopping.
Energy.
Yeah. And wherever it ends, it's a very pleasant loop. Everything about it is heavy and solid and, has some really bad associations. But when it comes down to it, it's a beautiful river. So
Thank you.
I think that's what it's about. Yeah.
All right, let's move now to Elaine. If you would introduce the work that's been included in the show from your side.
Well, there are three pieces, and this is interesting because the sampler that's on the screen is one part of the body of work, but there are two other samplers that come from different bodies of work that were also one in the show, one in the catalog, and this as the final, or perhaps just one of the iterations when the show travels. This is.
Can I jump in? Can you show the other piece?
Please.
It's on the wall. So this is. No. Down below. Numbers not. Yeah. There we go.
This piece is a kind of deconstruction of Bauhaus, what they say and what they mean. And for me, its inclusion is very much about Didion's voice. When Didion, a wonderful stylist, but she speaks through other people. Her essays are crystalline in their construction. She has multiple voices that she curates into a cogent statement. And I think that the use of this kind of chatty, perhaps oppositional even, quotes is very connected to Didion's way of expressing what she wants to talk about. This is a feminist statement about what was said about the Bauhaus and what actually happened. All the women were put into weaving and were at least discouraged from being in painting or sculpture.
Thank you. And finally, Liz.
Yeah, it's So I was looking, so, oh, so this piece is not in the show, but it is in the book.
Mhm.
I wonder if you have the images of the works.
Because it's three, it should be on a wall. If you scroll down, keep going. Mm, Keep going. Oh, these are from the book. I see. Do you have slides from the show? This is all you have, or? Because Liz is around the corner there that way.
Yeah, I thought we had.
So go up further. I think they're all from the book, Liz. I'm sorry to say.
Okay.
I think you just have to work with that.
Okay, I'll work with that.
I'm sorry.
Apologies, Liz.
Thank you. So yes, so this is the image that's in the book, and it looks really good in the book. It's next to Hilton. Can you help me with the artist? The colors on this page are really uncannily matching, and so I understand why the designer chose that. But so these works are ceramic, and they this one, the two that are in the show, or one is glaze. One's called a califaction, which is glaze, and it also has other minerals and stones pressed into it. And then the other is like this piece we're looking at, which is, but it's called a caesura. This one is an inflection. The caesuras are they have a break in them, but they're one thing. It's a poetic term, I believe, that means a break in a poem, and a poem is one thing. So it's not a diptych, it's something that has a rupture in it, but it contains that rupture. And so what I'm going to talk about, I'm going to talk about just a quote that Hilton had from Joan Didion in his essay. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but my attention veered inexorably back to the specific, the tangible, to what was generally assigned or considered to be peripheral. And so I guess I wanted to bring that up in relation to these works. I love that about her work, that she is interested in the real, and I feel sculpture, and what I'm interested in too, is expressing through, you know, three-dimensional space and materials, and allowing them to carry the meaning. And so I was very happy to see in the show that Hilton had chosen the caesura with the stones, and the califaction with the stones and the caesura, because I think those two things, the califaction, for me, it was kind of overwhelming to see it, because I grew up on a rice farm in the Sutter Basin, and we pulled our water from the Sacramento River. So I basically lived at the edge of the Sacramento River, and on our side, it had been reclamated heavily, and it was just stones, round stones, and across the river were all these trees. And so it was sort of like Hilton kind of pulled something out of my unconscious that I didn't realize.
That's my job.
Yeah, you did a great job. It really hit me hard at the opening too. So you know, that difference in that, you know, it was nature, and I think Didion talks a lot about this, the difference between, you know, our inaction on nature and there they are.
There you go.
There they are. So the one on the left is the califaction, and the one on the right is the caesura.
And Liz, the artist that you're referring to is Chira Ohata, a Japanese American artist who she, as we know, she did a lot of work early on in her career about uncovering anti-Asian sentiment in California and particularly Hawaii. So it was just a perfect landscape, but also, meaning. In addition to the powerful visual of you coming from that part of the world,
Yeah, and the colors, it's like a beautiful, beautiful, like iridescent page. I love the page. So
Yes.
luckily for me, I get 3 pieces in the show.
Yes. Well, it was a pleasure. And one of the reasons there's a quote there near Liz's piece is about the river swelling, Sacramento River swelling, and after there would be flooding, she describes what the earth would look like. And Liz's work was very representative and reminiscent of what she was evoking when she talked about the greens and the blues that would come back to the earth after the temporary devastation of that land because of the river. And then you go back to Marin's piece, which really begins along with Umar's map, really begins our journey into sense of place. And when you turn the corner there on the opposite side of this wall, Elaine's piece is on that side of the wall, and that really was speaking about how she wasn't really going to stay in Sacramento. That one of the things that was so powerful in terms of working on this show was her complete sort of evolution from the person that she was supposed to be to the person that she became. And Elaine's piece is so evocative of that, and also a latter part of her life where she said that when she was married to John Gregory Dunn, she would go with him to visit his family in Connecticut in the 60s, and her mother had a sampler his mother had a sampler on the wall that said, "Bless this home, bless the people who come in." And she said, it just would always completely freak me out because we were living in a time in which no one was protected and no one was safe. So Elaine's work to me, there it is. Elaine's work to me was so evocative of that kind of tension between, quote unquote, the niceness of embroidery and the complete sort of political devastation and beauty and terror that is evoked in Elaine's piece, the political upheaval that begins there. So I think it's on the other wall. Yeah.
Thank you. That's an extremely nice, eloquent.
Well, no, it's true, and it's sort of there's no one. Well, there's no one.
Form.
I don't feel that there's anyone in the show where there weren't at least 2 to 3 considerations: the visual, the political, and there were many women in the show. That was very important to me, and it was also very important to me that they had a connection to what women were supposed to do and what they ended up not doing.
Exactly.
That there was a disruption of the status quo in the work. So that's, for instance, that painting. There's a Pat Steer painting, and then there's a wonderful Silka painting opposite it. And then you see a little photograph of Georgia O'Keeffe with her cloud painting. So it was almost as if, Russian nesting dolls, where you take out a doll and there's another doll and another doll. There had to be resonance beyond the sort of pictorial for me to evoke this kind of emotional energy that I wanted in the galleries very badly.
Hilton, could you talk a little bit about the very first image that most people visiting the exhibition will see, which is the portrait of Didion by Bridget Lacombe
Oh, outside.
outside,
Uh-huh.
pulling up her turtleneck up over her eyes? I thought this is a very interesting opening statement for an exhibition that is very much about looking as much as it is about reading.
Yes.
Obviously are both fundamentally visual activities, and yet the first image that we see is this one of
Let's show the second wall, because then you can see the whole.
the installation,
Yeah, there you go.
of her sort of retreating from looking. I thought this was
Yes, I had a wonderful conversation with a colleague here, and he said, you know, only you would put up an enormous photograph of the subject hiding. And it was so, I loved, when I saw Brigitte's contact sheet, it was the picture that I wanted very badly, because, you know, how much do we know about any subject really? And I think that Joan's playfulness often gets jettisoned, as she might say, in favor of, you know, seriousness. And there's, of course, we can be serious, and she's a very serious person, but there's also a great deal of wit in her writing. And I wanted that image to be an invitation and a refusal at the same time, that it was something that would draw you in and make you sort of wonder who was behind the image. So if we had a picture of her smiling, and that wouldn't mean nearly as much as this person saying, this photograph saying, well, it's a mystery. There's the, she is a mystery. And I wanted very much to have her wit be part of the introduction, so that, you know, famous face, what do you do when you cover a famous face? You kind of go more toward it than away. And around the corner is a beautiful Edward Weston photograph of the landscape of her youth of California. It was right
just on that adjacent
not there.
wall. Yeah,
it's right there. And so these two images would sort of be on a perpendicular angle, and you would get the two aspects of the show, place and subject.
and it's interesting from the way that this camera angle has it. There's a kind of wonderful abstraction to the Western photograph, which distances itself, even
Yes.
Didion is distancing herself from the audience too.
Yes, and I also wanted to set a precedent there and use the walls as a, you'll see it repeated in the exhibition, that the wall space becomes part of the show. It's not just a place to hang things, but it's part of the atmosphere. And just to say too, that Annie Philbin, who runs the Hammer, it was her wonderful idea that there would be an image outside of Joan. And I don't think this, I think we were initially talking about some other photographs of Joan, but when it came to it, Annie really very much wholeheartedly supported this idea of cloaking, you know, the famous face.
One of the ways that you've written about Didion's work in specifically in relationship to this exhibition was in terms of the uncanny.
Yes.
The uncanny aspects that emerge in Didion's writing. And I wonder if you would talk a little bit about, you know, maybe in relationship to this image, but maybe also in relationship to Liz and Marin's and Elaine's work, what it is about the uncanny that is important to you, and from Didion's perspective, or from the perspective of Didion's work, and how that emerges in the work of the three artists that we have with us today.
Well, one of the definitions of the uncanny is the thing that can't be explained, right? That it shows up, or that it's an inevitable moment that can't really be explained. And I think for me, I'm very resistant to exhibitions or functions, museum functions, where I'm being lectured. And one of the things that was very important to me was to deepen the mystery of Joan's work and the work of these artists who are all mysterious. To me, nothing can be, they're not really what I would call selfie artists, you know, that you don't take a picture of yourself in front of the sculpture and move on. They're each in their own way, there's a deepening of mystery and a deepening of political and sociological and emotional connection to the work. And I wanted that resonance always, that there would not be an over explanation of the objects that we have. So because Joan, for all of the specificity of her writing, there's a lot that she says that she doesn't understand, right? That's another beautiful vulnerability of her writing, is her ability to say, this is what happened, this is what I did, I'm still working it out, I still don't understand the resonance of this particular event or person. And so by allowing for the mystery of human beings and connection and objects and making art, I wanted to enhance Joan's vulnerability and her beautiful way of expressing the non-conclusive. There was no conclusion in her work. There can be very, very, very pertinent lines about a situation, but in the end, when you finish an essay, she really hasn't decided on what the thing is. She's just telling you what the thing is. She's describing the thing. So each of these artists have made the thing, they're describing it in the actual work, and it's up to us to use our noggin, our imagination, and our hearts to say and feel what we feel about it.
Liz, I have a
I
question
hope
for
that's
you.
a little bit, I hope that's clear.
That's clear.
Thank
Liz, I would like to ask you, and this is going to be entirely unfair to you, but maybe more fair to Maren and Elaine. But this question goes to a hypothetical. You are teaching a course, art course, and you have a bunch of younger, ambitious, budding artists, and you assign an essay of Didion's to that class to read and respond to in some work as an exercise. What do you have them read and why?
That's unfair. I'm just going to stick up for Liz.
I'm gonna ask Liz, but it's less unfair to Maren and Elaine because they'll get the same question shortly.
Okay, well, I love A Book of Common Prayer.
Oh, it's so good.
I think it's amazing. I think that I like sort of I read a part of it when I was in it was a Whitney, and I think it was 2006, and I had a piece called RWBs, and there's a part where Charlotte Douglas has passed away, and the narrator, whose name I'm now blanking on, Grace, thank you. So she's talking about going to the airport to transport the body of Charlotte Douglas back to America. And she's standing by the coffin and she says, you know, I felt I should put a flag on this coffin, but there was no flag there, but there was this kind of caricature of a flag, and it was red and it was white and it was blue, and that was good enough. And I don't know, there's something about Joan Didion, like that just to me describes so much of you know, what she gets at in understanding symbols and colors, and there's just so much in that book. The other book that I love, of course, is Where I Was From, because I think that is an incredible book that
underrated, very underrated. Yes.
Yeah, it really is about America. It's about California and the West, but in its relation to the kind of mythology of America that we all, that goes to that same thing of the red, the white, and the blue. And John Gregory Dunn wrote a great book called The Red, the White, and the Blue that I also read, that had, so that, you know, they were both, you know, very, they just were really deeply thought about everything that makes up the kind of mythology of America.
I'm so glad that you said that about A Book of Common Prayer, Liz, because that's where the work started to branch out into the larger political, and her interest in Central America and Salvador feminism was starting to deepen then. I believe that was in 1977, and it was so hard to not put the whole book out and have people read it. But the line that I love, and Liz, you might love it too, is the beginning when she says, "I will be her witness." And it's just one of the great feminist statements. And I remember writing to her about, I had written about the book, and Joan read it, and she emailed me and said, "I never thought of it that way. Thank you." So.
Maren, do you have an essay or a book that you would assign to students to respond to generate work?
No. I mean, I love her writing. But right now I can't, and it's been quite a while since I've read it. And so I cannot tell you of which I would assign my students. I would just generally say, you know, this is a person whose work has affected me. And this is a sincere, honest, gifted person. You know, you choose.
Totally fair. Elaine.
That's wonderful.
Elaine, do you have a pick?
I think probably Slouching Towards Bethlehem, because it was the first I read it, or maybe 2 or 3 years after it came out. And those essays, I just reread it just to see what I thought about it. I often do that, have a first impression and then go and reread it years later. And I still think that Slouching Towards Bethlehem is a most incredible piece of work.
Yes.
I also loved her gimlet-eye description on California Dreaming.
Yes.
Center for, what's it called? The Center for Study of Democratic Institutions. Just, I mean, she is just really funny about this. And all I kept thinking was that all those pantries on West End Avenue full of virtue signaling Fig Newtons.
Yes. Yes.
It's just hysterical. And it's
Yes.
wit in that.
Yes.
Kind of way in which she describes this person talking, that person talking, all of them saying absolutely nothing. Okay, but just enjoying the confirmation bias that they were all sharing.
Yes.
It's a great story.
She said that's interesting, Elaine. She said that that working on movies helped her learn how to write where people are speaking at cross purposes. You know, that it was something, it was about writing scripts that actually gave her the technical knowledge to, yes.
And you can hear that in,
yes.
I mean, you can hear that in the way that she
yes.
voices
yes.
overlapping. But Slouching Towards Bethlehem stands as an incredibly terrifying
yes.
piece of work.
So I have a question that follows up on that. I think, Hilton, in your interview, in one of the longer interview that's published in the Paris Review, Didion at one point praises Edmund Wilson's writing for being, I think the quote was the opposite of authoritative.
Yes.
In its tone, and she was obviously saying this as being very admiring of that. Yes. And it's interesting because when I read Didion, I don't get this. She sounds very authoritative, and what Elaine just said in terms of her ability to sort of observe what was going around you and, cut through, forgive the French, but a lot of the bullshit. It's, that's an authoritative tone, even when it was personal. Became more so when she branched out into politics and reporting. And so I'm curious, from your standpoint, Hilton, what is that tone of hers that at one stance could, praise this idea of being opposite of authoritative, but at the same time exude a kind of authority in how she wrote and what she wrote about?
Well, I think a couple of things. You have to do the work in order to have the authority, and then you have to forget the authority. I think that the amazing amount of research that she did for every project is a lesson in terms of of not speaking before you know something. And then the second aspect of her work that is very interesting is that there's no real division of tone between the fiction and the nonfiction. And so that the nonfiction has a narrative thrust that you would associate with fiction. And then the fiction has philosophical and intellectual inquiries that you would associate with essays. So I think that what she did brilliantly was to mix the genres and also to use everything that she had, including screenplay writing, to give us short lines, to transition very quickly. And I think that her, the uncanny aspect of her writing really is its ability to sound like one narrative. And it is one narrative. It's a narrative of the self evolving from one aspect to another. And there's, again, I don't want to make too much of a point of this again, but just to how much fun it was to go through and work on this show and read aloud funny passages from her writing. So one of my favorite books as well, Liz, is Where I Was From. And a lot of the aesthetics of the show I really got from her. So she would say, as a child, I'm just quoting from memory, paraphrasing. As a child, I wore an eccentric amount of black, which I can see now comes from San Francisco bohemianism. I have a cloak from my great grandmother that I wore to my first dances. We have it in the show. And I don't know why I had it. Since this particular grandmother came from Oregon, not California, so she wasn't involved in the, quote, romance on the ranchero scenario. So she had a wonderful irony about place. And then there was also another aesthetic consideration early on in the show was when she says that we tended to like, in Sacramento, we tended to like houses that were large and dark. The silver, it was considered just right if the silver was turning green. She said, to this day, I can't stand to look at new silver. It looks new to me. And so when you go into the beginning of the show, you'll see, and Elaine and Marin are such powerful presences. It's in this very, very defined sense of place that is part of her authority. I was speaking of place. And I think something else too, which is that the West is not giving credit for language, right? A lot of the time it's about behavior, it's about land, it's about action. And I think that part of her brilliance was to give that place, which she says defies language.
Yeah, she admires, I think it was in her review of Norman Mailer, correct?
Yes.
talks about that is a great testament to not even trying to define that language, is to
That's right.
be able to capture
She
it.
says that it's a place where conversations, and I'm just paraphrasing, but a place where conversations and thought trails off like skywriting. Isn't that
Right.
beautiful?
Yeah.
And it's true that if you spend any time in Sacramento, Los Angeles, or San Francisco, all places where she lived, the conversation does trail off. I find myself doing it in my class on Wednesday evenings when the sun starts to set, and I just am mesmerized by the West, by the way in which it looks. So I think part of her genius really was to find a locus and a language for the inexplicable, the overwhelmingly natural world of California.
There's a part of Didion that is characterized often as a kind of detachment, but also a kind of rawness that comes maybe from being a reporter and a writer specifically. But I know this is something that you've talked about once before, I believe with David Remnick, your editor at the New Yorker, but there's a moment in the documentary that Griffin Dunn produced, I think in 2017, called The Center Will Not Hold, where he is interviewing Didion and talks about her thoughts when she confronted this moment that's written about in Slouching Towards Bethlehem of confronting a 5-year-old high on acid.
Yes.
And she says that, you know, and the Griffin asks her flat out, you know, what were you thinking? What did you think? And most of us are trained to think that that there's going to be a kind of moment of sort of empathetic shock or disgust or whatever the sort of, you know, standard human reaction is. And of course, Didion's reaction is, oh, it was gold.
Yes.
You're a writer.
Yes.
And it also struck me in that same interview that you did in the Paris Review, there was a moment where she says to you that when she was living in New York, in almost similar ways, this was an echo where she said she was really happy to have been in New York on 9/11.
Yes.
And that was another moment where there's that kind of rawness to Didion's ability to really inhabit a kind of detachment from events that were affecting others in more conventional ways, and her being able to separate herself from that. And so I'm curious, Hilton, from your standpoint, what in this exhibition or what in the kind of engagement with Didion's work evokes for you that kind of rawness or that kind of detachment, which comes all the way back around to really peak our emotional states.
I think you answered your own question a little while back when you said inhabiting distance. I think this is a crucial aspect. No artist can be a great artist without having critical distance from their work, so that Maren, Liz, Elaine have that. They're able to inhabit their distance at the same simultaneously. And I think that it's a very, very revolutionary act for a woman in particular to do that, because women are trained not to look at, they're trained to look away, right? And to help and to look at a situation. Deanne Arbus wrote an incredible letter about that once, saying, describing, you know, that there was some distress on the street in New York, and she asks her friend, and it's really just the beginning of her work. She says, "Would it have been better? I couldn't not look. Would it have been better to look away?" And the question of looking away doesn't really preoccupy male artists for the most part, I have to say. They assume that it's a right. And part of what is so extraordinary about the tension in her work and in a lot of the women artists that we have in the show is that there is a tension between giving themselves permission to do it, first of all, and then really sort of exploding the genre at the same time. So when you look at Maren or Liz or Elaine, you're looking at pieces, sculptural pieces, ultimately, that we've never seen before because they gave themselves permission to do it. And that is a very revolutionary, powerful thing. That's the first part of your question. The second part has to do with why Joan did it. And I think it really goes very far back to her mother. Her mother gave her a notebook when she was 5 years old and said to her, instead of complaining, write it down, describe it. And so she had this wonderful permission. She was given permission to speak. And I think that that's a very revolutionary thing for women to have still. I hope I answered that question.
Certainly for me, but I'm curious to hear if Liz or Maren or Elaine have a response to that.
Well, I like what you said, Hilton.
Thank you. Thank you.
Yes.
We do.
Yeah.
All right, there's another moment when Didion says that before beginning a novel, she would reread Joseph Conrad's Victory, and before writing a screenplay, she and her husband would watch The Third Man, which I believe was a screenplay by Graham Greene.
Yes.
And so I'm sort of curious, I like this. I always like, and I think a lot of us like to hear who are the artists, who are the writers, who are the creators that other makers and other creators, turn to on a regular basis to kind of jumpstart the engine or remind them of what they are doing. And so I'm very curious, Elaine, and I'll ask everybody the same sort of question, but is there a work, writing, visual, something that you find yourself turning to often in order to kind of jumpstart the process?
I work so continuously that jumpstarting every project I do starts with a great deal of reading to prepare. There's something I want to say, and then I read, and then I select through other voices what it is I think I want to say. And
But is there one, sorry to interrupt, is there one particular thing that you found yourself returning to help you get to what it is that you want to say?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't think that, I don't, just knowing Elaine's work, I don't think that would apply because each piece is so different in terms of content. So maybe how can you rephrase the question, my friend?
I'm curious about this sort of well, let me put it this way, Hilton, since you're jumping in. There's another moment where Didion talks about retyping her own work. Mm-hmm. And often sort of rewriting her own work in order to get the feel for it again. And there's also the sort of famous anecdote about her retyping Hemingway's passages in order to sort of see how Hemingway was able to write the sentences that he wrote and how to do that. So let me put this to you, Hilton. Have you ever, or is there passages of Didion's that you have retyped in order to see how she has done it?
No, I've just retyped them in my heart. I don't like typing. But in retyping in my heart, I love her, and I tend to love unearthing the things that people don't talk about in her writing, which is from really her political work. So that when she was going to Hawaii in the 1960s, middle 1960s, she wasn't really just going to hang out at the Royal Hawaiian Hotel. she was doing really kind of extraordinary prescient pieces about anti-Asian racism, and that she could pass as a white person in those worlds and get the story, seems to me very much a part of what I said earlier about would it have been better to look away? And she says, no, it's not better to look away. Oh, I wanted to make one other point. Do you mind?
Oh.
It was connected to the feminist and the womanist impulses in Joan. I was in LA very briefly, and I was having breakfast, and the maitre d' said, "Oh, I went to see your show," and she was very complimentary. And then she said, "And also, I want to point," and it never occurred to me. She said, "I want to point out how beautiful it is to see a woman age and not change her face, not do anything to suit the status quo. You have pictures of her in every age." And I thought that was, I almost burst into tears. It was such a profound realization that we had let Joan grow, and we didn't stuff her with anything. We didn't Botox her. We didn't change her hair color. We didn't fatten her lips. We didn't give her cheekbones. We let her be. So that was, and that another woman saw that was just worth the price of the ticket as far as I was concerned.
I'd like to just jump in here and quote. I think this is interesting. Judith Thurman, in her own collection of essays, A Left-Handed Woman, actually quotes Didion. And here she says, "The writers I admire most never use a careless word. Their sentences are unimprovable." And then she quotes Didion, "Style is character."
Yes.
And that, she's writing about Georgia O'Keeffe here, but I think if I had to talk about jump starting, it would be looking at works of art, reading passages in which I know in my heart that they are things that absolutely had to be done or made.
Yes.
That I can feel the internal push. I can feel the integrity. I can feel the depth that went behind producing something in which the structure and content are so well made.
Yes. The inevitability of a thing. Yes.
Exactly. Just that it couldn't be made otherwise. That
Yes.
nothing needs to be added, nothing needs to be subtracted, that it
Yes.
is there. And
Yes.
that's what Didion does, style is content,
Yes.
both a visual and a linguistic metaphor.
Yes. While admitting, while the concurrent narrative always is, where am I? How do I feel? And so in the middle room, where we have wonderful pieces by, well, we have, it's a room in the 70s where things become radicalized. And there's a quote about the end of the beginning of the 60s and the end of the 60s. And she says, it was hard to talk to me in those days. It was hard even to get my attention. And just to say it, yes, just to say it, and just to say this room, actually this room, lovely Barbara Bloom piece there in the corner, and but Betty Saar. I think when we can admit to who we are, we can see who other people are.
And I think she also talks about being on good terms with your former selves.
Yes, yes, that's right. That's exactly right, Elaine.
So we're at our hour mark, and we'd be remiss if we didn't allow our audience, who I'm sure has questions and curiosities that they would like to enter into the conversation. So at this point, I want to say on my behalf, Hilton and Elaine and Liz and Maren, thank you so much. This has been a too brief but very rich nonetheless conversation. And it will continue here as I put it back to Carolyn and the team at the Rail to see what our audience has to say and has to ask.
Amazing. Yeah, definitely could go on. Thank you all so much. If anybody does have questions, feel free to kind of raise your Zoom hand, or you can put it in the chat. Our first question will be from GE. You should be able to unmute GE to ask. GE wants. Oh, actually, sorry, I'll ask on your behalf. I see here. So GE would like to know, what lessons, if any, did Didion learn from Zora Neale Hurston's origination of participant/observation journalism/writing? Thank you.
Who's the question for? I'm sorry.
It seems like it's open, so yeah. Feel free.
I don't know what her relationship to Zora Neale Hurston was, but she came of age during a time when journalism was it was called New Journalism. It was a kind of weird specious movement called New Journalism, and people like Gay Talese, Joan, Norman Mailer, James Baldwin were doing pieces where they weren't pretending that they weren't there. And they were part of the narrative. Barbara, just wonderful writers who were part of the story. So I think that this idea of not claiming authorial distance from the story was something that was really evolving during the time that she began publishing longer pieces in the Saturday Evening Post and elsewhere in the early 1960s on.
I have one more question that I'll enter in here while the audience continues to ruminate on theirs. I'm curious, Hilton, since you've had conversations with Didion, she did not, to my knowledge, write very much about visual art and artists, which is not a requirement, obviously, but it's not a major part of her output or her observations. I think the one essay that I think that where she really engages with an artist and an artwork on its own terms may be the essay on Mapplethorpe, but there may be others. And I'm curious. Yeah, I'm curious from your more expansive knowledge, you know, how did Didion relate to or talk more about visual art, both in her work and in her own conversations?
She wrote a really wonderful piece about George O'Keeffe. She wrote
but that piece about O'Keeffe, and I'm sorry to interrupt, but I find that piece about O'Keeffe is not so much about O'Keeffe's work
as herself,
as a kind of figure, right? And that's where the character as style as character quote comes from.
Well, I think that she wrote, I think that she really was a participant in visual culture as a screenwriter, and it wasn't so much of a pressing point because the visual was in the page for scripts. But I think that I think that one of the things that we'll hopefully will have eventually is some of her film criticism from when she was at Vogue. And there's a very strong, she was fired because, you know, she couldn't love the sound of music and other things. But she has a very fine-tuned sense of the moving image. And that's another part of our show where you see John Wayne and Kenneth Anger and all of that. I think her visualization was for movies more than an object.
That'll be very interesting to see, because I in my own sort of dive into some of the archive, the very first piece that Didion wrote for the New York Review of Books was on
The Woody Allen.
Yeah, and in that piece, she very handily dismisses film reviewers. And the work
But you can only drag other people when you've been a drag yourself, you know.
So I'm sure there's some other questions that are coming up.
Yeah, great. So we have one from Lynn Crawford. He should be able to unmute.
Thank you. This has just been wonderful. I have a question, Marin. Your piece really fascinates me. And when I saw, on this little tiny screen, chains and rope, it looked sort of menacing. And then you said it's marvelous, or it's wonderful, it's a river. And that disconnect between my initial response and your brief explanation made me feel the way I feel when I read Joan Didion, where sometimes I'm reading her and I'll feel one way and then I immediately question myself. And I just that was just a fascinating, visceral connection I made. And I'm wondering if you could just talk a tiny bit more about what you were doing there.
How flattering. Really amazingly flattering. Well, it was really because it was so very, very heavy. I couldn't do anything with it.
But you said it was marvelous and flowing. And
well, it became the only thing I could do.
that reminds me of her work. So anyway, yeah.
Is that true? Does it seem like her work is the only
In many
thing?
ways, to me, it seems heavy and then light. The weight varies in a very specific way that always takes me by surprise a little bit.
Well, thank you. And if you went up there and touched that thing that I made or put in the space, you were exactly right. It's impossible even to almost pick up a link. It's really heavy.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn and Marin. Our next question is from Kelly Hopper. You should be able to unmute to ask.
Hi, thank you so much for this conversation. It's been wonderful to listen to everyone. I have a question. One of my earliest memories of reading something by Didion was her talking about, and I won't be able to place which work it's from, but her talking about writing about troubles in her marriage and potentially writing in lieu of getting a divorce. And then someone contacted her and said, "Does your husband know that you've written this?" And she said, "Darling, my husband edited it, right?"
What a team.
Yeah. And I was just so, and I continue to be so struck by that permission to use one's private life, which I also think has strong gendered valences, right? This sort of right to own your experiences as part of your art, and how women are, I think, often encouraged to keep the dirty laundry and launder it, right? And so I was wondering, and maybe this is a question for all of you about how your personal private life comes into your art, but also I'm thinking about Hilton's sort of what seems to me privileged position of having this private correspondence with Didion, as well as the opening image of her hiding away. And if you have any insights about how she viewed privacy, or sorry, that's rambling, but I'm just curious about that. Thank you so much.
Did you want me to answer that.
Hilton, I think that might be a question for you to start.
Oh. It's a good question, but it's a pretty simple answer. I hope you're not disappointed. She gave me permission to do it. I sent her some information about other shows I had done, and it was similar to when I approached Toni Morrison. I was so frightened she would say no, and her email was so, I can just weep thinking about it now, but what she said, your show will be beautiful, of course it'll be beautiful. And it was sort of like having your mother's permission to be free. So that's what she did, yeah. Have at it, have at Joan, yes.
Beautiful, thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Kelly.
you.
Let's see, I'm gonna go to Mary next. You should be able to unmute.
Hi, I did, thanks. Hi all. A girlfriend and I were very fortunate. We saw the exhibition 2 weeks ago and incredibly powerful. And thank you for putting it together. It was great.
Thank you.
I have a question for Hilton and the curatorial team. Fortunately, that weekend, we also went to the Broad and Mocha. And I was really struck with how your process in choosing what to include in the show. Because there was a lot, just looking at the Broad and Mocha, there's a lot of California, contemporary California right there, and a lot. And one piece in particular in the exhibit in the Didion show, there was this wonderful watercolor of a Pinto and an Albany parking lot. That is just like, it's the essence of the Bay Area, right? The light and a beautiful, but just curious to hear a little bit about how did you make those choices? Some of them were expected, like the Tebow, beautiful. That's what the Delta looks like. And how did you decide what not to put in? Maybe that's too big and you—
No, it's a great question. I'm just laughing about when the team sometimes would suggest something and I would go, I'm just remembering that it was always a funny situation, and Connie Butler, who was so great, would just laugh and it would get off the table very quickly. But I think that it, for any show, for me, it begins with the feeling of the subject and your imagination and what you remember as an art historian, meaning that, you know, part of what I love about visual culture is that it's available to everyone, and it depends on us to give it a story and a narrative and a context. And so there were things that I had thought about for years, and that some other people had forgotten about. For instance, that Jack Pearson had done wonderful drawings based on some pages from her book, but I had seen that in 1990. So a lot of the information that you see in the show is a sort of huge back catalog of images that I had loved, but there was no context for. And then added to that was Connie and IK would know specifically more about California stuff than I would. There would be a suggestion, or I remembered loving Michelle Zelapani's work, and that I knew that she was Hawaiian, and did she have anything? And so it was really curating by association, and also the tremendous backlog of information of things that I had always wanted to use, and the things that weren't used were things simply that didn't fit the narrative of Joan.
Thank you.
Sure.
It was a great show.
Oh, thank you
Really
so much.
fabulous.
Thank you. It was a great team and a great experience.
Thank you for that question. So just a couple more. I see Elizabeth Weiss with your hand raised. You should be able to unmute to ask.
Hi, I was lucky enough to see the show as well. I was with Mary. I was in LA last week. I'm a New Yorker. Hilton. Oh my God. Thank you for this
Thank
gift.
you.
Oh my God. So when I was looking, and thank you for the artists who are here. I love your work, and to hear from you is just, I'm welling up. A gorgeous, gorgeous work, and what a unique curation. I was really struck when I walked in how things were separated, you know, like it was beautifully curated, and there are these big rooms and little things, but they were so potent. They were like these, maybe like those quotes. They were brilliantly integrated. But I was thinking, and maybe Hilton, you can answer this. What do you think Joan would have thought of that show?
I kept imagining it. I kept imagining. She was pretty infirm, and so I imagined that she would be in her chair, and I would be wheeling her around, and she had this gesture with her hands that if she was excited about something, it wasn't through her voice, it was through gestures. So I imagine her going, I was very nervous about Martin Purrier came through. And I think that I felt much better when the older, more established artists who are used to working in a different way came through. So Martin, Jack Pearson, and there was a chorus of acceptance about the curation of the show. And that made me feel a lot more confident, but knowing that Joan would have loved, and she would have loved it because she couldn't have imagined it herself. That's the mark of a generous person. Instead of being resistant to that, she would have been amazed because she couldn't have imagined it herself. I think digging up those Don Bacardi portraits of her, one of which I own, but I think that would have blown her away. That, you know, it was her 40-year-old self, along with those pictures of me finding those pictures of Sharon Tate on the last afternoon before she died. I think that room would have completely blown her away, along with the Black Panthers. It was that's another piece that doesn't get a lot of attention, but her wanting to connect, because he's from Oakland, first of all, Huey, but also wanting to get past rhetoric is what she keeps talking about.
Thank you, Elizabeth.
Thank you.
Thanks, Hilton. All right, our final question today is going to be from Chloe, our programs director here at the Rail. Go ahead, Chloe.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for this incredibly generous and amazing conversation. My question is for Hilton. I wonder if you can say a few words about titling the show and the title, What She Means, which I find so apt in terms of just relating to a dialogue between you and Joan, but also especially the word means, which I feel gets to the essence of what words and visuals bring in their culmination and in what you created. So I was hoping to hear you talk about that.
Oh, well, it's pretty silly thinking on my part, really. But the book that I wrote the introduction for was called What I Mean. And that was the last sort of posthumous collection that came out. And I was very fortunate that Shelley Wanger, Joan's editor, and Joan wanted me to write the introduction. So when I was casting around for a title, it just seemed obvious to me to sort of use a pronoun, but also to just say, it was a way of presenting her, and presenting her not as Joan would present her, but as I would present her, and the great team at the Hammer. So it was just really kind of just taking the I and putting she and really getting on with it. It was a lot of work for us, and any way that I could cut corners, I would do it in terms of thinking, because there's so much thinking to go into the show. That's really, it was kind of simple. It's sort of on the order of that nice woman's question about my relationship with Joan and privileging the course. I said, well, she just gave us permission. So it's sort of like, sometimes it's not as brilliant as I would like to seem all the time. Sometimes it's just saving space and time.
Thank you so much for that answer.
Thank you.
Well, that was a brilliant title. My son saw the book and the cover. It's very wonderful how the design of the book is made.
Yeah.
Joan Didion is in white, and then recessed is what she means. And you know, he's 10 and he read it down. So what Joan she Didion means was, and I love that the way that in that sense that what the word means, you know, and you took it from her, but you know how it just becomes so huge.
Yes. Well, from the bottom of my heart, I thank Liz, Elaine, Maren for their incredible voices. There would be no show without those artists. They're all pivotal and rocks, so solid. And then we could have constellations around them, really. So thank you, all incredible women, incredible artists and thinkers. And I know that I thank you too for Joan. She would have written thank you letters because she was very well brought up in Sacramento, but in lieu of thank you notes, I didn't know how to find you. I thank you now publicly. Thank you very much.
Very welcome.
Yes.
Thank you
It's an honor, truly.
Yes, and a privilege.
very much. And thank you, everyone else on the panel. It's a pleasure to engage.
Yes. I'm sending you all a kiss. Mwah. Bye.
Thank you so much. I know, Hilton had to hop off. We do have a tradition here at the Rail of ending our community events with a poetry reading, and I'm so honored to welcome Betsy Fagin here today to the stage. Poet Betsy Fagin is the author of All Is Not Yet Lost from Belladonna, Names Disguised from Make Now Books, as well as a number of chapbooks. She works as a reference and instruction librarian in New York City libraries, helping people navigate information landscapes. Thank you, Betsy, so much for being here today. I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you so much. And it's an incredible panel. Difficult to, I can't add to it. I'm just going to read what I brought to read, which is two portions of some longer works. The first is called Situation Room. Perhaps now isn't the time window. Why here? Why so white? Everything looks too true. Figured it's the end of me if never wonder, no simplicity. And that's impossible, because God is good. His t-shirt says so. Mystic visions recollected me to what real reason is. Material, for looking. Like help must form protest or sanctions. Intervention without me, our sacrifices at the shore, in the headlands when the river was young, they remember us, that we're living this together. So busy, so decidedly leaving raised swords to rust, to perish in platonic misunderstandings. Pay the fare for the whole world, destructions turned into money. Spinning golden star-buried treasure right here. Re-up feelings of generosity if you have them. Who are your people? Are they generous, kind? In marble-top time capsules from before, when the triumph of manners, what it is to be cheerfully alone, was rotten through with shame. Wasted luck. Should have celebrated when we had the chance. Now nothing is inconsequential. living matter crossed into dance, a joyful imitation of never waiting and money enough for lunch. Rabid wanting smiles and waves, movement of stone shaped into terraces, perchance seating there for beaten love loves to win. Internally trained to cheerfulness, externally stood in crowds silent, salient qualities detached from reason, as surely as this now adventure unfolds. Longings gone, spring returned with a healthy conceit and nervous tension. Soreness, traffic, some moron or other. I misjudged myself rather than you. Chapter 8. Telling this street from that, crossing what's deeply thought with confidence, place, relevance, authority. What makes him so sure? Maybe he's disinformed. All he knows are written things, bad and not that bad, trouble and dinner. Invite him to imagine we or weather not, what we share, this water, air, also sun. Remembering relational as being alone, outside with a sad past. I always take the river one bank at a time back to you, your dislikes, hates, and incapacity to shift. It cannot journey through death-drenched certainty, but stays stuck, insulated from flowing with the current toward being, not just waiting for. Chapter 9. I know I have lived enjoyment very much, not because of the wounds or love turned to business. I count revolutions, seen enough to know dusty old systems that finish your sentences without ever letting you talk. In any corner of the world, well-being for friends and enemies alike built into the foundations, the policies and procedures in place to convince that our connections don't count. Matter of fact, divorce yourself, sit across the table from us estranged, wear a watch chain, a monocle maybe, count gold, puff on cigars while others serve salad. Never mind cloud recognition. Once it was ice, the same liquid in your own body, salted and spread into ashes and smoke, gas, light, some sticks. Let that connection count. Credit more than money costs, worth more than our usefulness and productivity, worth more than thousands of acres in trade. This recognition quietly locked away is why it hurts so much. Flour on the shelves again, more to feed the babies with than just milk powder and talking about times gone. Everything remembers how it used to be, but won't remember forever, eventually forgotten. And the second piece is a couple pieces from something called Vague and Ambiguous Language Causes Trance States. And I intended to put some things in chat, but chat is too active. So then when I did get on the train and express running local, whole ass people sprawled out asleep at the end of the car, eyes closed, perched, one elbow over a backpack, paper and plastic bags wrapped around their feet, cardboard secured with rubber bands, Gucci. Dream world is no longer accessible. How restful can that be, propped up, protecting, exhausted, OODA loop? I wish I could see people and see if anyone knows what I'm talking about. I would put it in chat, OODA loop, OODA loop, observe, orient, decide, act, OODA loop. Train roars to a stop every minute or two, bells sounding, doors about to close, sounds of Candy Crush after all these years, patent leather shoe wearing Bible study, Conversations about a possible job telling me, moonstruck, to please be advised before the train crosses the bridge. Jelly Serpent Queen works smarter, not harder. All the messages on t-shirts are written backwards today. Nad Raj, Selenia Sol. In response to market forces, it would be a huge mistake for you to give up on yourself right now. Allow overwhelm, even the sickening feeling, without denial. Your body can do this. The only thing stopping you is your mind. Imagine a different set of lives dissolving bitterness in the open of oceans, in Hudson filth or Gowanus, Ganges, with all the generosity of renunciation counting coup. What we could have done, but didn't. Jupiter could have swallowed all the other planets, but you can't see that from here. You can't see the 23-degree tilt of the Earth on its axis, or the fact of us all on the same one tree. We're not just looking for a bird, we're looking for movement. See breathing the same air, see endless opportunities for distraction. Some doctor ordered keeping away from pain that permeates every level of existence. How about resting with it, in it, fish in water? Myself can harmony everywhere. Join me. I'll be near the feeders in Avodia, near the sugarberry tree. And the final piece I have is, I got one Joan Didion line that I can offer. The title is Food from Feed. How to celebrate food from feed. Separate, I mean, difference from chemicals, pesticides, grown ground, what gets celebrated into our bodies. Emotion body, spirit body, one earth body of animal and plant from the body earth of earth, where water river nourishment, where sun generosity, patience and care become harvest. Our love for becoming ourselves, cold disruption into dismantle industry chokehold and containment. What do they say about influence? Like the biggest business interests control legislation, like light, rainfall, deciding who prospers, whether children get feed. Corporate interest is quick and easy to table. An ice cold Coke first thing in the morning every day. Don't talk to me until I've had my coffee, my smokes. Don't talk to me, don't even look at me. I'm going to make this make sense for all of us. Thank you.
Wow, Betsy, thank you so very much for that reading today. It's incredible. And thank you, of course, to Hilton and Maren, Elaine, Liz, Jonathan, for such an incredible conversation today. We'd also like to thank Nancy and EK for their support in preparing for today's event. We would also like to thank the Terra Foundation for sponsoring our NSE program and making these daily conversations possible, and for their support of our growing archive, which you can view on the Rails YouTube channel. Today's event will be up there shortly. For the past 22 years, the Brooklyn Rail has provided a platform for the arts, culture, and politics through our monthly publication and public events like our daily NSE. Please check the chat for a link to donate to support the Rail. And join us tomorrow at 1 p.m. for If We Were to Be the Same Degree of Spoken, a Rail reading curated by Daniel Owen. And you can now turn on your microphones and say hello and goodbye as you leave. Thank you all again so much for being here today.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you
so much.
Thank you.
Be well. Thank you so much.
Jonathan.
It was great.
Wonderful.
Thank you, Betsy, for
Thank
that reading.
you.
Goodbye,
That was
goodbye.
amazing.